Today I am going to be making a clay version of Pauly Shore to use in a series of Claymation stop motions for Pauly Shore because one, why not? And two, they don't have a Pauly Shore action figure for me to use, which I know is a travesty, but we will right this wrong by making a clay version of Pauly Shore. Now, the reason why I'm making a clay Pauly Shore is I just found out that over the past year or so, Pauly Shore has been recording some cover songs and releasing them on YouTube, and I have to say they're absolutely fantastic. So I did what any other person would do. They got inspired to make a series of stop motions featuring Pauly Shore as a clay character to these songs. Is it going to be hard work? Yes. Is it going to be fun? Of course. Is it going to be Pauly? Sure. So to start off, like I normally do whenever I'm making a clay character, I like to start with the head or the face so that I can size everything around it, because to me that's the focal point of any clay character. If you have a tiny head and a big body, it's going to look weird, and I spend a lot more time on the face getting it right than I do the body, so I'd rather redo the body if I had to make any scale adjustments. So what I do is I get the skin flesh tone for Pauly Shore, and then I put in like the divots and the overall shape that I want to do. So some indents for the eyes, some indents for the mouth, and then attach a nose to it, then we can work with that. For shaping and kind of the fine details, I like to use the back of a paintbrush or a pencil. It's inexpensive, it's cheap, and in the pencil's case, it's to the point. So the clay characters I like to make are very much cartoonish, almost like caricatures, without the fine details. So if you're trying to make someone who's a person, the best way to do that is to accentuate the features that make them who they are so that they are somewhat recognizable. And then whatever scenario that they're in, people will know, or you just name your video, Clay Pauly Shore, and then people will know exactly what you're making. But in Pauly Shore's case, he has, I'd say his hair is one of his key features. For when he was in Encino Man, he's got the very long hair. His style, the clothes he wears, that makes him very recognizable. His voice, which you can't capture in clay form, so that's going to be a little bit tough. And I'd say we're probably going to focus on the fashion and the hair in order to make this character work and look like Pauly Shore. I know Pauly Shore's got a few different roles in a few different movies. Everyone's got their favorite. My personal one is Jury Duty, where he has the shorter hair, but I feel like when people think of Pauly Shore, they do tend to think of Encino Man with his long curly hair. So for this version of the clay Pauly Shore, I will be going with the Encino Man look and a little bit of the Encino Man style. So if you're wondering what I'm doing with the eyes and the mouth, what I like to do is I use the back of the paintbrush or the pencil and I'll poke holes where I want the eyes and the mouth to go. This is not how they're going to look. They're not just going to be the beady eyes and the flat mouth. I put those in as the base, and then with some of the flesh color, what I do is I'll make the mouth and then I'll put it around where I just put the black in so that it almost seems underneath, and it gives it a little bit of dimension, some cheek features, some chin features, and then on the eyes I do something similar where I'll put on the brow, and then on top of that I'll put on some eyebrows. And in this case, Pauly Shore's got very expressive eyebrows, so I'm going to probably make some thin eyebrows and try to make them a little bit arched so he looks a little bit surprised. So we'll see how effective I am with that when we get to that part. So we can see now that the lips took shape, and I gave Pauly Shore a little bit of a smirk, curling up the lips a little bit, because Pauly Shore just seems like one of those guys who is always happy and always smiling. So clay Pauly Shore should also be happy and smiling. So now we added one of the brows on, so you can see the eye is starting to take shape a little bit. It doesn't look like just a beady eye. It's starting to take more of a human shape so that he's somewhat more, not realistic, because this is in no way intended to be realistic. This is just supposed to be a fun little caricature of a clay Pauly Shore. A caricature, if you will. So now what I've done is I have one of the eyebrows on. Like I mentioned before, I wanted to make them a little bit more expressive. So I did that by making them pretty thin. And then they're kind of arced, which are very similar to Pauly Shore's eyebrows. So, maybe. So now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making his hair, which, as I mentioned before, this is probably one of the most iconic pieces of making it recognizable as Pauly Shore, which is going to be like his long curly hair from Encino Man. So the way I'm doing it is I'm taking the brown for his hair and I'm pinching it off into very small strands. I'm not smoothing it out because if I leave it a little bit lumpy, then it'll kind of be reflective of what the curls would be, as they're just kind of long and flowing. So you could do this two different ways to make curly hair. You can make one solid piece and just make it wavy. However, the way I kind of envision it is that if it's kind of strands that are all grouped together, it'll be more wild, which, if you're familiar with Pauly Shore's hair, I would say it's more wild and charismatic. The hair almost has as much personality as the comedian himself. So I think we have enough hair pieces. I didn't count them off, but I think we're gonna try to place them on and see how it looks. And if we need more, we will add on some more. So we don't really have to push them in. The way I'm gonna do it is you layer them on, and then we will be able to kind of push down on them, and they'll kind of form into the head. And then I just also picked up the green. So what I'm gonna do in addition to the hair, Pauly Shore is also known for wearing headbands, especially in Encino Man. So I would like him to also have a very vibrant colored headband that he's going to be wearing. So I think green stands out pretty well. And so what I'm going to be doing is you just take it and you flatten it to the length that you want so that it'll wrap around his head. And you can play around with the thickness. I want to make it pretty thin so it doesn't seem like it's just a massive thing on his head, but also that it's not going to take away from the hair, because I had mentioned hair is important. So I want to make sure that it doesn't take away, but it just accentuates Pauly Shore's style. So I'm going to place on the pieces of hair around where the headband's going to go. Once the headband's on, we can then fill in additional hair pieces to where we want them to go. And I think some of the hair, if it kind of overlaps the headband, that'll give it a more natural look. So we'll see if we can achieve that. So I'm going to put it on his forehead, where a headband normally is worn by Mr. Shore. So I'm liking the way that it's coming out. The way it's seen behind the headband looks pretty good. Now what I want to try to do is wrap it around and get the effect of the hair also coming over the headband. So it's a more natural look, like the hair is just there, headband's holding it in place, and then the hair just forms freely. Right now it looks like the hair is being pulled back by the headband, which if you see Pauly Shore usually wearing the headband, the hair is all over it, all around it. So you saw I just poked in with the end of the paintbrush the hair that's kind of pushing it down into place, and that's gonna fuse with the head clay. So it looks like from what I need, I'm gonna need a few more strands of hair to kind of fill in the gaps. I want to make sure that there's enough hair, because if I don't have enough, I could always just pinch off some more. So there's plenty of brown clay to go around. All right, so that should do it. So let's put these last few pieces on, fill them out. You can see the back of the headband doesn't quite touch, but that's okay because that's going to be covered with hair. So we're just going to put those pieces on. The way I'm doing it is right now I'm filling in all the places that I still see the scalp. So anywhere that's flesh colored, I'm going to put the hair over there. I tried to make all the hair the same length because the longer hair on top is the same as the longer hair on the bottom, but it'll fill out where the short comes down not as far. It's kind of like a normal person's hair, all grows at the same rate. So you'll have some that's longer than the other on the bottom versus the top. So just trying to go with the more the more natural look. Different people are different with their hairstyles, but this is how I want my Pauly short to look. And you can see I put the hair on top and I kind of draped it over the headband on either side so that it looks like it's the more natural flowing hair. So then when he's standing there, it'll just look like it's pretty natural and it's just wild as he is. So I left aside some of the flesh tone before for the neck, which I have right here. So just smush it into a cylinder. We'll be able to piece that in later. There's no point of putting it on now because we want to make the body first, and then we'll be able to attach them once we do that. And then off to the side, you can see I have another relatively flesh colored clay, but it is not the exact same color as the face because I did not realize that I had run out of the flesh colored clay that I'm using. So I had to mix my own, and I'd say it's pretty close. It's just a combination of like a tan and a peach. And once we put on the arms, it'll be fine. It'll just be a version of Pauly Shore right after winter, where he was vacationing in the Northeast and he didn't get a lot of sun, so his arms are a little bit of a different shade of skin tone. So right now I grabbed the red clay and I'm going to be working on a t-shirt that he's going to be wearing underneath his jean vest that I would like him to wear, because that is in my opinion, that is a very classic Pauly Shore look. So I went with a red t-shirt. Pauly Shore wears a lot of patterns and colors. Making patterns with clay is not something I am ambitious enough to do right now, like any floral design or something more fun. So what I'm going to do is, rather than patterns, I'm going to put on a very vibrant color red. That'll just make it pop and stand out. So he'll still be flashy, just not a pattern flashy. So I'm going to make a t-shirt design for it. So you can see what I did is I measured the body where it'll kind of fit his body, or sorry, his head, so it makes sense. And then the t-shirt's sleeves along with it, so you can see the red T right now is because it is a t-shirt. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking the lighter color blue for the jean jacket, so I'm measuring to make sure that it's going to be draping over him. So right now I'm flattening it out so that it kind of wraps around him and it doesn't look too thick. You got to be careful not to make it too thin, because then it'll have some structural integrity issues and fall apart. So right now I'm not putting too much weight into the design of it, because after I put it on him, then I'm going to be able to form it over him. So what I'm doing with the back of a pencil now is I'm actually going to poke through armholes, because the arms size that I'm making right now are actually pretty similar to a pencil size. And then once I pop those holes out, what I can do, or what you can do if you're practicing along at home, is you could put the pencil in there and just kind of stretch it out a little bit so that you have some wiggle room to work out. So that's what I'm doing now. It's also smoothing over the clay from the little bit of the rough edges that we just made by just poking a pencil through it. And that looks pretty good. That looks like the arm's gonna fit, and I think that's pretty good. So I'm just looking at the front and the back, just deciding on what I want the front and the inside to be. And I think where the pencil poked through, it looks a little bit rougher. So if I just make that the inside, I don't have to worry about smoothing it over, because as you smooth it over, you're gonna mess with your holes. So we don't want that. So I'm just gonna take the sleeves and poke them through the armholes we just made in the jean jacket, which is like you would normally put on a jacket. So if you need just an example of how to put on a shirt, just grab a jacket, grab a mirror, and you'll be able to see. So I like the folded look. So as I put it on, where you zip up or button up a jean jacket, it kind of is open and loose and flowing. So I left that look on, I draped it back, and also the same thing with the collar. Since we made it thin, we had the ability to kind of mold it, and which is also why I said you don't need to worry about shaping it too much before we put it on, because we'll be able to do that now. So now what I'm going to do is the neck piece we held aside before. If we just plop that right on and kind of push it into place, and we use our handy dandy little paintbrush to, if you just a little bit of pressure will fuse them together so that it won't fall off. And doesn't have to be a lot of pressure, because if you put too much on, it's gonna really change the shape and start blending together, which you do not want. You don't want his neck to be bleeding into his shirt, or his shirt to be bleeding into his neck. So you got to be a little bit careful with putting too much pressure, or not enough pressure that it'll fall apart. Sometimes you could also break off little pieces of toothpicks and put them into the joints for a little bit more of a tighter hold. I think the size of the Pauly Shore, we're not going to need toothpicks because he's going to be a little bit shorter and he should be able to stand fine. So what I just did there is I took the color for the arms and I made the arms just cylinders, and then I took the end of the paintbrush and I just poke it in so it makes the shape of a hand. So really simple hand design. To me, I think it looks fantastic. I really like making my clay figures with hands like that. They're very similar to like what a Lego hand would look like, just a little bit more humanistic than a Lego character, but I really enjoy them. And then they could make fists, they could open things, they can close things. And then to match the headband of Pauly Shore, we are also going to make little bracelets on those, same color, and they're just going to go around because Pauly Shore knows how to accessorize, and so does Clay Pauly Shore. So now that the arms are in good shape, literally, what we can do is we can start attaching things to the body. So this is something that I don't do all the time, but for these arms, I really want to do it because I want them to hold in there and I want it to look like a t-shirt, is if you put little indents into where you're putting something. So this is going to be the arm. Then we could take the end of the kind of the appendage right there and make it a little bit thinner. And now it is in the army now. So it is perfect, fits right in. And now you have a little bit of like a texture change or a little bit of a height change between the arm and the sleeve, so that it doesn't look like just one continuous piece that's just like a different color. So just adds a little bit more pizzazz to the figure, I would say. And then we're gonna push it in a little bit just to make sure that it fuses pretty well, so that as Pauly Shore is dancing and singing in the later uses of stop motion animation I'm gonna be putting him in, his arms don't fall off, because if you've ever sang in front of a crowd, which I have not done, but I can imagine if your arm falls off mid-song, super embarrassing, and no one wants to put that on Pauly Shore. So what I'm doing now is same trick we used on the arms. I'm doing it with the head because he's going to be doing a lot of head bobbing and head movements. So now if we poke a little hole in the bottom of his head and then pinch off a little bit of the neck, if we just put very little pressure on that, his head pops right into place, and now he can move around and he's not going to fall apart, and he's just a fine looking half of Pauly. So now we are going to make the other half of Pauly, which I'm going to put him in blue pants. And so we have a darker blue. The way I buy the clay, they come in little cylinders, which oddly enough are very similar to the thickness of his legs. So I'm just going to take it and I'm just going to start that as my shape and maybe make them a little bit thinner and longer. I just pulled off some so that I could size it right, poking it into the table to get a flat waist, and then poking it into the table again to get the flat pants. Flaring them out a little bit just because the style of jeans that he wears, they're not super tight, so I want to make sure that they have kind of that baggy loose look. And then taking black for shoes and just making little like bread loaf shapes that we can kind of stick out from the bottom of the pant legs. And again, not a lot of pressure needed for these because the weight of Pauly Shore and the figure is going to be putting it on it. So after a few minutes, it's just gonna fit right in. And then the same trick we were doing before with poking into the piece to kind of make a little bit of a stronger connection. We'll do that at the base of the pants, and then we just pinch off a little bit into a skinnier form for the top, and then he just fits right in. So I think we have completed our clay Pauly Shore. I think it looks great. I'm gonna have so much fun having him sing along and dance to some of Pauly Shore's music videos that he's been putting out. Again, that was the inspiration for this. I think the hair came out great. I might make some different outfit choices for him for different videos or for some other things. I'm definitely going to leverage this a lot because who doesn't love Pauly Shore?